And he said, well, I'll tell you what your problem is. And I'm like, what's my problem? And he's like, you just need to understand that Christian men don't like overweight Christian women. We don't want to date them. What? That was assaulting to me. Oh God. You know, in raising up leaders in our church, can you give me leaders that weigh at least, 110 pounds or less? I don't think those are prayers that God's like, yeah, let's do it. Mind-boggling. Like, it's mind-boggling to me. These things that should be so unacceptable to still be dealing with. Hey everybody, this is Rita Springer. Welcome again to the Rita Springer podcast, and Worship is My Weapon. Thank you so much for continuing to pop on here and watch this either in the live premiere or download it for later. I just so appreciate it. I've been trying to, just really, for me, I pray about like, oh gosh, is there subjects that I need to talk about? Are there people that I love to interview? And so we've done a lot of that. And I started just to really process and think about some of the tough subjects in the church that I have had to walk through that I've just really never, I guess really even publicly like this, ever talked about. And I think when we're talking about vulnerable subjects that sometimes the church doesn't do well, or talk about well, or communicate openly enough about in kind of a good way, I do think it's very healthy for us to talk those things out, bring those things to the table. I am not the kind of podcasting person that wants to come in for shock value or anything like that. That's just not even my aim or my goal at all. I really just want to encourage people. My heart is to bring life and encouragement to those of you that have felt perhaps unseen, or you're walking things out that you just need help and assistance in just looking at it maybe from a different perspective. And so, we've done part one with obesity and the church. I grappled with, do we say obesity in the church, obesity and the church? Those are two completely separate subjects. I'm not talking about, weight issues in the church, in our faith. Weight issues are in the world. That's just an in the world thing. I don't think, kind of talking about how that looks in the church. I mean, I watched that HBO Docu-Series called The Way Down, that was released, I think, a couple years ago now. Being someone who's living very close to the proximity of where that all went down, it was pretty mind-blowing. But, watching doc series like that, there's this thing when you look at sometimes the way the church handles or takes a subject like weight, and they just make scripture look almost like insane. The way that they will try to apply that to scripture and then use it as a way to control people's thought process in it and people's opinion of perhaps what God thinks about them in the process. Again, I don't know that I could even talk about this if I hadn't struggled with some of these things. And I've been around a long time to where I can watch a series like that. And the thing that boggles my mind still to this day, watching, documentaries that are just almost about these religious cults and people that just buy into this like bogus theology, that while I'm watching and I'm just like, how in the world are you buying into this? Hey, everybody, this is Rita Springer. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me on the podcast here with Worship is My Weapon. There's a lot of things I'm doing right now. And one of the things that we provide alongside this podcast is a newsletter that we do that we send out to those of you that are subscribed, where I just answer questions and kind of give you information. And sometimes you guys are able to write in with questions that you just are curious about. We love that. We love that interaction. I actually love to interact with those of you that want something a little bit more beyond the podcast. So if that's you, make sure to get our newsletter, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, and stay in touch with all the things that we're doing here on the podcast in that newsletter. But when you come into a place of any sense of freedom, and it unlocks, that freedom will always unlock the patterns in our mind that keep us tied to an unbelief system, an unbelief kind of way of thought and way of thinking about ourselves. When you start defining your worth under the banner of God's value, and you really start breaking free of lies and just, years and years of thinking or being told or being verbally assaulted with words in the opposite of really what the Lord has always said about us, what the Lord clearly states in the Bible about us. There is a radical shift in the mind where you lay down the anxiety of untruth and the black dark cloud of the lie, and you can decipher deception pretty easy. In fact, I think I almost want to try to do a podcast on really how do you come out from underneath deception and be someone that's discerning. I think sometimes that we have this, I don't know if it's just we just put our religious thickness on a simplistic understanding of certain things. I don't think the Bible's super complex. I think that surrender is probably super hard for everybody because of what we've already said yes to and what we've built in layers of being okay with that. It's just hard to, it's kind of like losing weight, it's really easy to gain it, but it's super hard to lose it. And so, I watched that series and I was just like, how are you buying into this? Like, how do you come up under that kind of abuse in that vein? Sometimes when there are abusive systems in place, led by unbalanced, mentally, I think, ill in some places, people who come under the guidelines of Christianity and faith and Jesus and scripture, and then just almost destroy the whole foundation of God's love for us by then putting parameters on, well, God won't love you if you do this, and God won't love you if you do that. And it's just like, man, when you know the truth and you're like, actually, God loves the sinner, period. He doesn't love the sin, but he loves the sinner. And he's gives us these beautiful stories in scripture of waiting for us to come to him. James says, you come to me, I come to you. And so there's this follow through that God has with us that somehow in this weird, warped theology of self-worth, which is kind of what obesity and weight and all this kind of what you look like on stage and how you want your church to be presented. There are different aspects of this. And I think it's good just to kind of go over some of these things. And the first one is, I really want to just address if this is something that you've struggled with, where you have lived a life where you've been up and down in your weight, you've really, really come against that abuse of just, am I worth anything because of the way that I look? And this is, everybody deals with it. Everybody deals with this. I mean, you sometimes can't not see it on a playground anymore, especially among young girls. It is fed into our society by everything on the outside. And the church, unfortunately, is so influenced by the outer murmurings of what things are supposed to look like and what would be more acceptable, and that we function, I think, primarily most of the time as the church, not out of God's insight and revelation, for what he's wanting us to be as a church, and as an individual church, and what that individual church looks like. When you're planting a church, you're looking for branding, you're looking for what's cool, what's this, what's that. I mean, we're just inundated with this whole message right now that in order to be what you or someone else deems acceptable, this is the criteria on how to do that. And it's just such a game that we're all playing. I've played the game myself. And so I think that one of the first things that I just even want to attach my comments to in this is that I had to come into an awareness for me of what I had to let go of in order to actually have a true encounter with the living God, the living, breathing God, and the value that he'd placed on my life. And when I came into contact with that value, that heavenly value of what the Lord really, genuinely, absolutely, 100% thinks about me, I couldn't keep carrying what all the other things were saying that I was feeling, and my own shame and my own self-awareness and my own self-confidence didn't think when I was walking up those stairs on the stage. And I'm saying this for those of us that are in that position. I'm you could take some of this as the general thing. What I'm really talking about is in church leadership. There is this thing that's happened where, those of us who are challenged with, physical attributes that don't fit the criteria for what a perfect church may look like, or what somebody in leadership or somebody that's planting or running a church wants to be seeing from the platform. While I understand those things, the individuals that come up on the platform, everybody has a story. And so I think at first, before we look at leadership and bad leadership and all those kind of things, because there's a lot of reasons, I think, why we've encountered such bullying in the church in issues like obesity. And I mean, we can bring up a lot of different issues. I thought about this from my childhood when I was thinking about this episode, because I really think when I look back and realize the shift of how I would see things that didn't seem normal to me, even as a young girl, that changed the reflection of how I saw things. And I remember being very little, and we were in our Baptist church. My mom is a church secretary of this church, and there was a older man there, and he was missing a body part. He was missing a thumb. And I wasn't used to seeing that as a kid. I mean, we don't really grow up, unless you grow up in a war-torn country, missing limbs aren't something that's an everyday experience. And I remember thinking, oh, how horrible as a kid, like almost like scared in a sense of that man, because he had this hand where he was missing fingers from his hands. And it just looked odd. It looked weird to me. But I remember feeling like that's not right. Like that missing body part isn't right. And I didn't feel the guilt in that. I was a little kid. Nobody talked to me about sometimes you can lose a body part. Sometimes accidents happen. That dialogue wasn't something that I came to the table seeing that being like, oh, that's what I've heard happens with blah, 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 blah. So it was just a shock to my system. And you just kind of get used to it. But years later, my oldest brother, Zane, brought home his girlfriend, Kathleen. And Kathleen's story had been that she, at 17, I think 17, 18, was in a water skiing accident where she had let go of the rope out on the skis in the water, and the rope got caught on something and lunged back and pulled all four of her fingers on her left hand off. And so he arrived to dinner with with this deformed girlfriend, in a sense, is what is what I was thinking. And, I thought about that when I was thinking about just even this subject, and I was like, how odd, like when you are not used to something, then something is and almost foreign to you. You can come in with a preconceived understanding of something because you've never been exposed to it. And anything that would be about that was the opposite of it. And so I think I actually thought back on that, those two incidences, and think, I don't even think about dismembered people like that anymore. Like, they are the most normal people to me. I engage with them. They are, I don't see them as any different than anybody else, but I believe that it's because I had that experience as a kid, and I had to almost shift and change my mentality for how I saw things, and how missing body parts actually formulated in my head, and how I thought about them spiritually, and how I thought about them mentally, and how I thought about them, verbally. And I think, coming back to that and just even having that kind of memory, I'm like, man, I think we need to get like that with looking at people, no matter what color, no matter what shapes. This is not the subject that should be uncommon to any of us. We're the amount of racism that we're dealing right now, that to me is mind-boggling. Like, it's mind-boggling to me that we are in 2024 and we're dealing with anti-Semitic stuff. I am like, I can't even find words. That, let alone with just what we deal with in our household, having black and white in our household. But it's just like, what? Like, how are we as the people of God even not able to fully respond with the right response to these things that should be so unacceptable to still be dealing with in our culture? And I do believe that is because we have learned a behavior of thinking something is not okay when it's okay. It should not be looked at or looked down upon to us as something that's unacceptable. There are people in our society who struggle with addiction. And there are people I've struggled with addiction in my life. I've been so clear and so honest in my testimony about even the addiction of dieting disorders as a coping mechanism and control for the loss, and for pain, and for grief, and for suffering in my own life. And so there are excuses and there are valid reasons why people are in the places that they're in their weight gains. And just even asking, people to write in and talk to me about some of their stories. I have some of their stories here, and I've listened to people verbally tell me some just assaulting stories. And I've seen some things online in the church that I just am like, is this, honestly, there's a part of me that's like, this cannot be real. Like, is this an acting debut of somebody? But unfortunately, some of these things are real. And I want to just, I think I want to just break it apart and talk about it first from the perspective of being an individual struggling with it. Everybody that has been treated poorly from the platform in a church, everybody that has been ridiculed or put through a cultish way down experience, or has something traumatic to say about somebody's vulgar interpretation of their journey in weight, and in their weight. Anybody that's experienced that is an individual that is walking something out as an individual. And so as faith people, as people who know Jesus, and people who say that we love God and say that we're adapting, God's characteristics to nature, and we're trying to walk as Christ walked. I, I we know, you guys know that you're not the critical police. You're not the judgment police of people. If you don't know somebody, but you judge them from the outer appearance of what they look like, you have no idea their individual struggle and what they are in the middle of that led them to the places that they've been. We were inundated on television with, My 600-Pound Life and all these weight shows and blah, blah, blah. And weight is a massive issue. It is a massive issue in this nation. I mean, I've heard more negative things talked about with this nation, with America's weight gain and the issue with our food patterns and the issue with our grains and our farming. I mean, there are things that I've seen in, again, docs that are on television that I've just like, oh my gosh. I just talked to a doctor friend of mine who was telling me that she in her office, she has a Happy Meal that's 13 years old and a bag of Dunkin' Donuts and that are like decades old and they've never decomposed. And I've seen these kind of shows but this kind of stuff still grosses me out because I'm like, man, in my day, in my dieting disorder days, I knew how many exact calories were in a Happy Meal. And I knew how I could, at least if I wanted something or any kind of a treat, I knew what a Happy Meal, how many calories were in a Happy Meal. And I knew that if I had, and so there's a part of me that sometimes I drive by McDonald's and I'm like, man, you just want a cheeseburger. You just want a regular cheeseburger with a regular fry and just a Diet Coke, a medium Diet Coke. And that's almost like nostalgic, from your past, from your childhood. And some of these fast food places are just like places that we never really could attend because we were so poor growing up. But my obesity, my childhood weight issues really stem from poverty. And many people stem from poverty. But, when I'm hearing, this gal talk about these Happy Meals and these Dunkin' Donuts. It's like, it does do something to me where I'm like, I haven't been to a McDonald's since, because I'm like, I just keep seeing that Happy Meal sitting on her shelf and being like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And I think that's a positive thing for me because it registers what's kind of healthy, and half the fast food stuff, we know it's unhealthy and all that kind of stuff, but we know why that they're there. And it is connected to poverty. Everybody that is in a process of feeling the shame of their appearance and weight is an individual going through something, and we don't know their story. And so for us to judge people, we can make an assessment based on what we've seen on television or what the percentages are of people like this and people like this. And yeah, there are great similarities and there are right similarities. And if we were to sit down with a doctor, a health doctor in that field, they would probably say to us, these are the similar things we see coming through the door all the time. I get that. But that stems from addiction. It stems from trauma. It stems from all these kinds of things that create an escape for people to do that. It doesn't give anybody an excuse to bully or to make people feel less than. When I walk up on stage and I was at my heaviest, I'm the one dealing with that pretty much 90%, 99% of the time. I'm the one in my head thinking, oh my gosh, what are people going to think? Oh my gosh, there's a camera there. Oh my gosh. Believe me, we're inundated with thoughts of, what am I going to look like? I still, in fact, when I was on staff at Gateway, I would never go back and look at the archive stuff. I just couldn't do it. I'm not one who really likes taking photographs of myself. And and being on camera a lot anyway. This has been super hard for me to do this. And you almost have to get to a point where I'm like, it is what it is, and move on. Because part of what we deal with is the constant rattling in our brain that we're not enough. And so I understand that a lot of this stuff is first going to actually go to that place in us. The woundedness that comes from the platform toward, or the judgment that comes toward the platform toward us, is only in addition to what's already going on inside of our own beings and our own heads. We're already battling with it, peeps. So when other people make it harder, and I do think it's bullying, because of their own perception of what the stage should look like. I mean, we are veering off to what it is that Christ himself actually is receptive of. My God has never said, I want you to weigh before you come and repent, or I want you to weigh before you come and journal with me. Because Rita, I can't handle it if you don't look the way I want you to look, wear what I want you to wear. That isn't the Lord. If anybody is under that kind of structure or any kind of leadership structure, I'm just going to say it as strong as I can say it. That is from the pit of hell, and get yourself out of the program immediately. That is not the way the Lord ushers people into the kingdom. It is not the way the Lord covers us in worth. What it is, however, is people in their unworth in leadership positions that are so held captive by their own weird, whacked out theology of scripture that they impose on other people a plan of authority, thinking that their job is to get other people into their line of obedience. And it's not the way the Bible reads, and it's not the way God talks. Does the Bible have scriptures about gluttony? Does the Bible have scriptures about the body being a temple? Absolutely. But I'm just telling you guys, if your mental state, and if your emotional state, and if your self-esteem is at the bottom of the barrel, you are going to look at a lot of those scriptures thinking that you just have to be somebody else, and you just have to be somebody else. When you lay down your heart and surrender at the altar, and when you go to the Lord about some of these things, again, I'm talking about us as individuals, the individuals that walk up on those stages that are struggling with this. When you walk up there, and when you're in the middle of this fight, and you don't have enough strength to pull on the hem of the Lord for your value, and you're bending over and bowing down toward someone else's opinion, is easier because you're wanting to please them before you just go to the Lord and find out, what does the Lord actually think about me? That was my freedom. I went to the Lord and I was like, you know what? I'm putting this curse over myself. I am putting all of this stuff and this lie that's under this lie, saying I'm unworthy because of this, and I'm unworthy because of this. And a lot of that unworth wasn't just because of my own self-hatred, but because of what people would say in the church. My mentorship program that I do, for years I used to have the dive school where I would pull creatives in and spend a week mentoring them. And now what I find works best with my kind of busy schedule is I do one-on-one mentorships. You can sign up for those. On the RitaSpringer.com website, there's a mentorship tag. You could just click that, and then that application will come up. Basically, what the mentorship program is anybody wanting a one-on-one. They're 4-week, 1-hour sessions that I do consecutively, one after the other by week. And we just schedule you on a Monday or Tuesday. I only take around 10 a month is what I can handle. But it has been just a beautiful, beautiful season of just continuing to just encourage worship leaders and creatives and songwriters. Really, you come to the table with the subjects that you want to talk about, questions that you have. Maybe they're cultivating worship teams on staff in your staff position as a worship leader. Maybe it's just a songwriting course that you kind of won in those 4 weeks. Maybe you're going through some struggles on staff or struggles in your life that you just want wisdom in walking out. That is what that mentorship program is about and for. And it is really my most favorite thing to do. I love getting to meet those of you. Some of you are all over the world, and my Monday and Tuesdays are my funnest days of the week because I get to interact with you and find out about your life and what God's doing with you in your call to the creative. And so if you are looking for that kind of a mentorship program, again, go to ritaspringer.com, click that tab up there that says mentorship, and you can sign up for that, and we'll get you started on that program. And, I think on the part one of this, my coming into it was my grandmother, my family members saying, what are we going to do with her? Because, telling my mother, what are we going to do with her? When I was just a little girl, what are we going to do with her? She's, no one's going to love her. And so for me, love was attached to look. So the way that I was loved was kind of attached to the way that I looked, that if I didn't look appropriate, then I wouldn't get people's love and affection. And we put that on God. We put that on God in so many different ways. And while the Lord speaks about health in Scripture, while the Lord talks about gluttony as a sin, it is, hands down it is. Any kind of addiction is a sin. Hands down. I'm not going to give somebody who's struggling with their weight an excuse to be fully, well, I don't have, it's just because of everybody else. Everybody else has done this to me. Everybody else has done this to me. No, nobody, it's trauma, circumstance, all of those things caused me to do and eat the way I was eating, to gain the weight that I gained as a young girl, to get to the place of obesity. I've been an up and down thing. It's a battle all the time. But the difference in me now from then was that I was allowing everybody else's projection of me to be the excuse why I did it. When really why I was overweight was poverty, trauma, all those things that I couldn't really register and get through. Once I began to lay down my trauma, once I began to facilitate surrender to the Lord, once I began to come out from underneath the addiction of doing weight loss in ways that created more addiction, like bulimia and dieting disorder mentality that was brought on by trauma and brought on by low self-esteem and self-hatred and all of those things that were sin. Once those things were laid down on the altar, that was the only way that I started to engage in any kind of like, man, I just need to get healthy. Exercise, those things. Even now, like I'm not even half near where I should be in exercise. I love to exercise. I love to walk. I love to do those things. My chronic pain keeps me from doing some of that stuff. And so I have to find a balance in those things all the time. But I'm not going to sit here and be 100% like, oh, you guys, I'm so sorry that you've been bullied. I'm so sorry you've been, when there is a responsibility that I had to own and take. And so when I'm talking as the individuals that walk up us, we know this more than anybody else. And before you can talk about the bullies, and before you could talk about the religious banner of how the church becomes a bully to it, we have to actually look in the mirror and say, what responsibility of this is me? And until we do that, and until we look at that fully and say, am I holding on to unforgiveness? Am I holding on to the trauma of my youth? Am I holding on to these things? And is that holding on to it manifesting into overeating when I shouldn't be, or not paying attention to my health in these areas and putting things in my body that my body's allergic to and my body, can't really function well with. Those are things that I'm just telling you, as vulnerable as I could possibly be, man, that's my story. And I still every day have to own up what I need to own up. There are a list of things I'm like, oh, I need to do this better. I need to do this better. And I'm just going to be super vulnerable and say, when I really went to the Lord about this many years ago, what will I ever find healing in this area? Because here it is too. My makeup, my body makeup is not a thin makeup. My other family members have that. I had the big girl genes and the thick girl genes, and maybe you call them big bone genes. I don't know. But some of us have that. Our body types factor into this as well. And I'm in my 50s, so menopause has taken me to the moon, man. And it is real. Like every TikTok, every joke you see about menopause is the truth. It is brutal when you're in the midst of it. And I have the metabolism. I think I said it. I feel like sometimes my metabolism is a turtle trying to get out of a rice bag. And so it's like, I just don't have that easy, quick metabolism. I just never have. I never, ever have had a great metabolism. And so for me, I'm going to have to reach far above to do anything, to get any progress with it, because I just happen to be in a body that doesn't lose weight easily. So that's not an excuse for me to keep my unsurrender and keep my addictions or keep my sadness or keep my unworth or make that the excuse for why I'm such and such pounds overweight. No, that's not the excuse for it, but it is a factor in my reality that, yeah, okay, for you, Rita, it's going to take a lot more. And if you want to come to the table with this, you not only have to drop this, drop that, and let the Lord heal you and all of those things that are keeping the control and keeping the addiction to overeating or eating at the wrong times or obsessing about certain things. But you're going to have to actually come into terms with your body's going to take a lot longer for that, because your body is not like other people's body. So it's a well-rounded, I think, understanding of what it is you're dealing with. So as individuals dealing with obesity, dealing with weight issues in the church, and feeling the bullying of other people, I want you to know we all as individuals feel this more than any bully could ever throw on us. We're dealing with this from this perspective. I found this really sweet email. I won't say names or anything. And this woman was just telling me that when she was in her early 20s, she was stepping on stage to lead worship. She said that this this person in the congregation felt like she had to kind of tell her that God wanted to break a generational curse of obesity off of her life. And okay, when I was reading this, some of these were cringy for me. And I cannot even begin to tell you some of the things that people have said to me, in this area and other areas, where you're just, if you are insecure in any of it, it's going to sting. It's going to totally sting. But when you are able to like pull up your bootstraps a little bit, you literally, the trade-off of this is that my mentality with people that do this to other people are just like, man, what does that person have in their life that they never fixed, that they had to think that they had to fix it in other people? And if that's who you are right now, and you're not free of it, you have no idea what I'm talking about. You won't see it in yourself when you whisper to somebody, I just want to let you know that there's a great diet on the market, blah, blah. And you think that you're giving somebody really great advice when you're not. and you're just wounding them and bullying them. And I'm maybe that's a little too strong, but if you don't see it in you, it's because you haven't yet had an encounter for yourself to know that there just are things we shouldn't say. And she goes on to talk about how she had PCOS. She had a PCOS diagnosis, and this was just really difficult for her to lose weight. So she'd been trying to lose weight and trying to lose weight and trying to lose weight and trying to break this thing. But the assault of that woman was so difficult for this writer. And my heart just broke for her, because I was like, and she even said, when she's on stage, she thinks about it all the time. Somebody else was writing and saying, hey, look, those of us that are that are overweight on the worship team on stage, we're and trying to lose weight and doing it. Sometimes it's like they kind of made this, I thought it was kind of a funny but true statement, saying, hey, look, there's something that we feel like we have to like get up on stage and get to the mic, and before we sing our song, state, hey, look, I've already worked out 3 times this week. I just had to laugh at that, because I'm like, yeah, it's like when people look at you and they say things, it's like you almost feel like you have to validate. No, I was in the gym like Monday through Friday, like 3 hours in the gym, and I was in the sauna, and I tried to, and you should have seen me 2 weeks ago. It's almost like we have to like vindicate ourselves in all that we're doing. And you don't. I'm just telling you, those of you that are in this, you don't. Be free. You don't. It is nobody else's business what you are doing in your run for health before the Lord. Like, don't let other people's insecurity fly all over the very thing that you're trying to walk out. And so I felt my heart went out to her, but she said, a few years later, I was at a women's conference, and the speaker of the conference had this prophetic word for me that she said is still precious to her from this day, that God was speaking, I'm calling you just as you are, not as you want to be. And then she later had remarked to her that it was so wonderful being so free, finding freedom in a body that she hated. And I love that. What was so positive to me about that response was that here, this curse was put on her as she was coming up on stage to break the generational obesity. It's like, who are you to say that to anybody? If somebody sat down with me and said, I really struggle with my weight and blah, 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 that may be a conversation we get into with, tell me about your family. Tell me about your family line. But to walk up to somebody and say like just stupid stuff, I don't know why we do it out of it's like, it's still just, like I said, it boggles my mind how some people are just like, they feel the need to do this. If you ever want to donate to the podcast and to ways that you can help support the ministry, we have a Venmo attached to this as well that is with my nonprofit Wearing Justice. You're more than welcome to donate to that, which is greatly appreciated. I just want to settle, like, again, those of us that are walking out the trial and error of weight gain and weight loss and serving in a church on the platform of a church and serving as artists or whatever, we are the ones that are walking it out and dealing with it the most. We are very aware of what we feel, and we really just don't need any help from the crowd. And I say that to just tell those of you that don't deal with what we deal with, to just find the grace and compassion and mercy of learning the exposure of people being overweight, and learn that and let that sit in you, that there are some people that don't look like other people. There are people come in all shapes and sizes, but everybody has a story. And until you know the story, you should never be so bold to think you could speak into their lives. The next kind of set of thing that I want to kind of talk about is leadership that looks down on people who are overweight, pastors and group leaders. And again, I really do feel like when this abuse is in the church, and when some of you maybe have experienced some of this abuse with your leaders. I got a couple emails here that I was like, yikes. I was sent a video that I couldn't find. I was going to try to find it. I was mortified by this video and thought, this has to be a joke. Like, this has to be a joke. And I've seen so many different kinds of videos like that. Why anybody in today's age would ever post a video as a pastor degrading women for their body type and size, and saying from the platform that no man would ever want that. I'm going to tell you, I was in a singles group years and years ago, obviously, in my 20s, and we had group leaders, and there was a guy that I was really good friends with, really handsome guy. But we were all really just great friends, and we would hang out after church on Sunday. And it was it felt like a group that you could trust. And I remember him telling me, I was like, well, wait a second. If you think I have a problem, what's my problem? Because we were talking about singleness. He was single dating, and I was single, and hoping that God would bring me somebody. And I remember having this conversation with him, and he was a leader, and he said, well, I'll tell you what your problem is. Now, I'm in my 20s at this time. He's like, I'll tell you what your problem is. And I'm like, what's my problem? And he's like, you just need to understand that Christian men don't like overweight Christian women. We don't want to date them. And that was assaulting to me. Like, first of all, that anybody would be inclusive to all Christian men, and put on all Christian men this type of attitude just floored me. I mean, floored me. And I knew it was I was insecure enough in my 20s that I was like, let that fly all over me. But and honestly, of course, I'd wish this on nobody, but 15 years later, that particular individual, their life was ousted out, their sin in the closet was ousted out. And it literally was the moment when you were like, oh my gosh, I carried the regret and the stain of some of those things that he had said. And then years later, you find out, oh gosh, I didn't have to carry any of that because it was coming from a place of immorality. But when you're in your early 20s, when you're young, when you're unaware of what people are saying to you, you just are not aware that a lot of times things are said from people in harsh ways, and you have to actually detach the voice from the person, because there is no way some of the stuff that people are told are not coming from somebody that's just out of line anyway, and morally just not with it. And I'm sorry if that is a little harsh, but in my experience in walking out this particular subject in the church, I've never been on the recipient end of a bullying experience without years later seeing something happen where it was like that, where it was just like, oh, there's the truth of that guy, or there's the truth of that girl. And although it's brought relief to me, what it's really brought is sadness in the plight of where we are in this. And so I feel like sometimes I'm trying to be so careful with what I'm saying. And so I'm kind of stumbling over my words, because I'm like, I want to say this in the best way possible, but I want this to be something that we look at and be like, yeah, like that's really not good. And this is really not good. And when we are leaders or pastors, for a pastor to tell his team, and I've heard this, some of the stories I've heard this, don't put this person on the team because they don't mirror what it is I want up there. I want this look up there. And I get that. It's a pastor's prerogative when they plan a church to want the stage to look a certain way. You want your building to look a certain way. I get that. But when you're doing something that is in terms could bully or discount other people's anointing, I don't think that in doing it like that for the showmanship of it, that we're asking God, oh God, in raising up leaders in our church, can you give me leaders that weigh at least, 110 pounds or less? You guys, I'm not thinking in my understanding of the Lord. I don't think those are prayers that God's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's get like this look of people and do that is a man's thing, much like you've heard me say, the award system in Christian music is not a God system. That doesn't mean that God can't be for somebody if they get an award. It means that God didn't come up with the award system. God's not sitting there saying, I'm going to hand out awards for this song. I'm going to hand out awards for this song. I'm an artist. God's not the one doing that. That's a man-made system. And you bow to that gratefulness, also to a man-made system who chose you to do that. But it isn't something that God does. God doesn't do this. And the reason I think it's in conflict with us is because when your attention on your leader and your homage and your allegiance is to your leader more than your allegiance is to the Lord, that leader is going to be able to completely win over your mind and how your mind works. And I think it's a warning to all of us not to not trust our leaders. Like, yes, honor, submit to your leaders. Absolutely. None of what I'm saying is about that. But when you're being bullied by leadership or when stuff like that happens, I mean, I got an email in here that I just was like, by someone who was in an internship at a church where the female leader of the internship, along with their husband, brought in the program that her job was to actually facilitate getting the women thin and getting the women to look great in this biblical internship. And so they were measured this is a ministry. They were measured. They were weighed. They had to, at certain events, carry around barbells constantly. If the leader saw them without their barbells working out, that blows my mind that anybody would ever be put under that kind of abuse. But again, I can say that freely because I'm like, I ain't under somebody's thumb. I'm under the thumb of the Lord. And my fear is in the fear of the Lord. And I used to be like that. So I fully understand how you can do that when somebody's words assaults your heart, because words are powerful. But if you don't have God's opinion of you as a solid backing, you're going to feel that so much heavier and it's going to bruise so much harder because we're giving allegiance to leaders without actually giving our worth and our honor and getting that from the Lord. And I want you to know that that's primarily, I think, what we're dealing with this. And so there's so much I could say about this subject, but us as individuals, church leadership and their perspective and their position on this is something that I'm like, we need to be better at this as leaders. I press freedom all the time. I'm pushing for freedom all the time. I'm asking God to give us as leaders in the church signs and indications in our own life that where do we need healing? Where do we need freedom? Where do we need to lay down these things? A lot of our mentalities about the way people look and the way people come to the table are really there because we've got these old filters that we're dealing with that just come out in the worst moments. And a leader who is not free, that becomes a leader, is a leader that will eventually teach bondage or teach being captured by something. And that's why I'm always looking at leaders and I'm like, man, do I hear freedom coming from their lips? Do I hear resolve coming from their lips? And I'm not looking for perfection. I'm just saying that when you fall under the guidelines of some of these cultish behaviors, you have to ask yourself, you have to pull back and ask yourself, why are these people able to get through to your head, and what allegiance and what homage are you paying to that you're not getting your value from the Lord, but these people are able to disintegrate your value within a word comment. And I know there's been heavy abuse, and we'll continue this conversation about it. And I want to kind of just maybe even weave some of this conversation into a part 3, where we pull into a discernment and an understanding of how can we discern when something's off in the church, when something's not right in the church. So I'm going to leave you here with that in this podcast, and just really kind of close this out by just maybe reminding those of you that obesity or overweight has been your issue. Just weight gain has been your issue. Maybe you're caught in a dieting disorder and you're on staff at a church, or I know that everybody has their own horror stories, but I think the bottom line to the horror stories of this really are when you put yourself into programs, when you put yourself into stage presentation, when you're in these roles in the church, or maybe it's just even a staff position. I'm fully aware that you're feeling it before anybody else is able to make you feel it. And I want you to process that. Where are you in the process of what you are dealing with personally? Because that has to be addressed before we address all of the sideline comments or all of the things that people can do within the church, whether it's leadership, whether it's pastoral, whether it's other people in church, congregants, whatever, that can actually hinder and break through your value system. And to those that are leaders doing that to other people, man, take an assessment of why you say the things that you say and why you feel the way that you feel about certain things, and maybe pull back and be like, man, why am I demanding this? And why am I demanding that? And maybe going back in your own registry of what it is was demanded out of you to demand something that Christ would never demand. I'm not talking about the balance of health and treating our bodies as the temple of God. That has to be addressed. That's an individual addressing. And I'm not talking about the spirit of gluttony. Those are sin. Yes, but I'm talking about what leads us to our own posture and our own looking in and saying, where have we allowed it? Where are we recipients of it? Where are we being abusers of it? Where are we being abused by it? All of those things. And just really encourage you, you're not alone. You're not alone in this. But let's break this down to the Lord and go run to the altar and be like, hey, God, even you can help me do this. Even you could help me do this. So I'm going to leave it there, and we'll pick up this conversation again.